Hello, bisexuals. Welcome back to another episode of the Bisexual Agenda. I'm your host, Kit Scales. Today we are having a winter mental health episode. I guess we did a mental health check-in in January with the Hot Quiz Summer episode with Jane Claire Bradley. And now I am back and I'm talking to Sarah from the Leeds LGBT Plus Minds project. We're talking a little bit about our own mental health journeys, I guess, and also about the project, which started in October 2020. It's focused on improving Leeds mental wellbeing service for LGBTQ plus people. They're doing some online and in-person events at the end of this month, 29th of November to the 4th of December. They're looking for people to kind of give their own experiences accessing and being in mental health services as queer people. And everyone involved in the project is a queer person who either works in mental health services or has accessed them themselves, or both. So yeah, I'll link everything you need to know about that in the description box. They also have a really good Instagram where they're sharing loads of resources. And although that's a Leeds specific project, I think this episode will be kind of relatable for anyone who has mental health problems. Honestly, who doesn't in this economy? And if you want to message me about anything we've covered in this episode, you can get in touch with me at the Bisexual Agenda Pod on Instagram. I've included all the trigger warnings in the description as usual, but of course this is a mental health episode, so it does have a lot more trigger warnings than my usual episodes. So I've tried to break it down into sections so you can skip over which parts you might feel you're not comfortable hearing at the moment. I hope you're all doing good. I love you so much. Thank you for your patience with this episode. I honestly feel like I've been experiencing way more Mercury retrograde things in the last week than I have in actual Mercury retrograde. I also had some audio problems with this episode, only on my side, but basically I was accidentally recording from my really bad earphones, which I didn't even realize had a mic. So I was basically recording my shoulder the entire episode, and there is a little bit of kind of rustling. If you basically imagine that I've been shrunk to the size of a matchbox and I'm in a Pringle tube surrounded by tissue paper, that's kind of the vibe. I have done everything I can to make myself sound as clear as possible. I have re-recorded some sections, and I've literally spent about 8 hours editing this podcast. So please still listen, even though there's a little bit of crackling here and there. It definitely improves in the second half. And Sarah had her Britney headset on, so she sounds perfect. Okay, I love you guys. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll see you in a month's time. If you have any ideas for episode themes or guests or topics, message me on Instagram, because I have no inspiration. I've been inside for 2 years. I don't have things going on in my brain right now. And maybe you do. Who knows?
So I'll start by introducing myself, shall I?
Yes, let's rock.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm Sarah and I work for Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service, which is a mental health service that's run by or led by the NHS in Leeds. And I am part of a project called Leeds LGBT Plus Minds that's looking at trying to improve Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service for the LGBT community in the city.
Yes, I also think it's good to say that formerly known as IAPT, because that's how I know your
that's how people know it. Okay, shall I do it again?
Oh no, it's fine.
That's fine. Okay.
Just because I was I've never heard of this thing, but the last time that was what they were called. And I think at different parts of England they're still called IAPT.
Exactly. Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service was called Leeds IAPT until about November 2019. But yeah, if anyone is listening from a different part of the country, there are IAPTs everywhere. Some of them are called IAPT, some of them have other names, but it's the IAPT model across the country, in England anyway.
Cool. So we're going to talk about mental health kind of broadly, but we're also going to talk about the project that you're involved in. And that is Leeds specific, but I think a lot of what we talk about today is going to be basically relevant for anyone. Obviously, people who are trying to access service in the UK, because I do have American listeners. Yeah, and we're going to share a little bit about our own experiences accessing mental health care. And an important thing I think to mention now about the project is that everyone kind of involved in it has experience of like accessing mental health services themselves. And I think that's really cool because then it's like the people you're talking to know what's up, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so my mental health experience. So where to start? Yeah, so I think I struggled with my mental health for a long time, but in a way that I didn't really recognize. I think when I was kind of like at school as a teenager, so we're talking like the late 2000s, the sort of like 2008, 2009 kind of time. I think mental health just like wasn't spoken about in the way that it is now. I can't really remember like the first time I ever really heard anyone talk about mental health, but it definitely wasn't a thing that was happening like when I was growing up or when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So I was kind of struggling all through that time, and then into my early 20s, just dealing with like depression and an eating disorder for quite a long time as well. Those sort of came to a head when I was in my like mid 20s, to the point where I was like living down in London and I had to leave my job and come back home and live with my parents. And I had what a lot of people probably a really common experience of trying to access mental health services. There was just kind of like getting like pinged from one thing to another, and nothing seemed to be quite right. And I had a referral to IAPT, but I wasn't right for IAPT. And then for a while, I wasn't right for the community mental health team, which is kind of like the next step along in NHS mental health care. So there was quite a desperate period of time of like waiting and trying to find the right thing and not really being able to access any help. And especially like where I ended up living, like back home with my parents in North Yorkshire, because it was so rural, there wasn't really any kind of like charity or third sector services that I could access either. So it was just kind of at the fate of the NHS, like waiting for things to things to happen. But eventually I did get seen under the community mental health team, and I started taking medication, which I still take now. Had like some kind of, I think it was like CBT based like guided self-help stuff at CMHT, which actually was really helpful. But then separately I did see I was lucky to be able to see a dietitian privately for like the eating disorder side of things. Yeah, I needed to take a long time out of work, which again I was really lucky to be able to do that because of the type of job that I had and like the sick pay that I could like get access to. And I actually got really into art. That was one of the ways that I think that one of the things that was really like important for my recovery. Got really into art and zine making and sort of like sharing my story through zine making.
That's so cool. What
Yeah.
did you like, were you on Tumblr? Are you like too late for Tumblr?
It sounds very Tumblr, but it was only a few years ago, so it was Instagram. Yeah, and I made zines about like different things that I'd learned in therapy and just some of the like very basic like models of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, that I just never come across before and actually just really felt like a key to like understanding a lot of what was going on in my head. Kind of went from a state of just feeling like I was in total chaos and not in control of anything, any of the ways that I was feeling or what I was thinking, to being able to look at actually some pretty simple like diagrams and be like, oh, right, that's what's happening. I'm not saying that like I looked at a worksheet and then I was cured, but it gave me like the tools, I guess, that I needed to be able to like think through and understand what was happening and why it was happening, and then like from that understanding being able to like change some of my thinking patterns and change some of my behavior to like get to the point that I'm at now. So yeah, it was probably a very typical experience in a lot of ways, in the sense of like finding it difficult to get into services and not having a great experience all the time when I was in them, I have to say.
Yeah.
But like I said, I was really lucky in a lot of other ways that like I could access help privately, and like I was able to go back to my parents to stay, and I had like a job where I was able to take sick pay. I will say as well, like I wasn't out when any of this happened, so I've never actually like talked about mental health in relation to my sexual orientation, like ever. Like with a professional, I mean, like obviously I have talked about it before. So I think there's still probably like quite a lot for me to explore there about like how those kind of feelings growing up of trying to like repress the fact that I liked girls, and if very effectively repressing that actually, like how much that probably contributed to the way that I was feeling. But yeah, I wasn't out, and there wasn't any kind of wasn't really any conversation about that side of things or that side of my life. It just never came up, and I was able to kind of like not bring it up. So yeah, that's my
I'm just wondering,
experience.
did you go to university?
Yeah, so I went to uni like 18 to 21. Definitely my mental health got a lot worse while I was at uni. So just found it like a very high pressured environment. I think it fed into a lot of my kind of perfectionism and like low self-esteem and feeling this like need to overperform. That's really common in people with eating disorders. So it kind of all just like fed into each other in a really messy way. And the university that I was at like didn't have like particularly much of like a queer scene at the time. I don't know what it's like now, but
Where did you go to uni?
Cambridge. So
Okay, I'm imagining no, but I don't know if that's true now.
I don't know if it's true now. It definitely there wasn't much going on in like 2010 to 2013. So I kind of didn't have that experience of like finding a queer community or finding like a place to like explore my sexuality, which probably would have helped, I guess. I know like a lot of people sort of experience that, don't they? Like when they're away from home for the first time and like at uni, and there's you know you come into contact with different people, like and go to different societies and all that sort of stuff. I kind of didn't have that. Yeah, I think like coming out has had a big positive impact on my mental health, even though my mental health is very like stable now, compared to what it has been. And I only came out like really recently.
That's so exciting. Did you come out
Yeah,
during lockdown?
yeah,
I feel like lockdown was when everyone was like,
yeah.
it's time.
I did.
I
I
love
did.
that.
And it wasn't even like, yeah, it wasn't like a big thing. It was kind of funny because like I think all my friends were just like, yeah, we know.
All your friends are like, yes,
And
you always seem very gay.
yeah, and my like friends of friends, like people that I don't even know were just like, oh, what? Oh, I thought she was gay anyway. Like, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And like it went down with my parents like much better than I'd feared. And I think I didn't realize like how much I was holding on to, even like on such a subconscious level, how much I was holding on to like all those thoughts that I'd had like as a child and a teenager about like the idea of being gay or being a lesbian or being bisexual, like how much I like genuinely believed like as a kid and as a teenager that would ruin my life. Like that would just be like, you know, that was the worst thing I could think of that could happen. Like, no one would want to be my friend. My parents wouldn't want to like have a gay child. All of this was like kind of unfounded, but this is like how you were kind of made to feel at that time, I guess. I'm talking about this like it's like ancient history, but it's really not.
I mean, yeah,
It's
it's like
really not.
Margaret Thatcher was like hard at work trying to make you feel like shit.
Yeah. But yeah, like I know like through school, I don't know if it's different for you. Like I'm 29, so that's that you can age me from that, but no one was out like the whole time I was at school. I didn't know any gay people. My parents didn't know any gay people. There's no one gay in my family. I mean, obviously,
There must be.
that I was going to say, like, statistically, none of that is true, but like that was the reality that I was presented with.
Yeah.
Calling someone gay was like still like a big insult, like all that kind of stuff. So I definitely had like, yeah, I always had this like fear as a kid and a teenager that being gay would just like ruin my life. And even though like intellectually and rationally, I like know now as an adult that that is not the case. And in a lot of ways, like society feels more like accepting than it did then, for me anyway. When I came out, I did just feel like this massive relief, like felt this like big weight off my shoulders. And that's at a time where like, you know, my mental health was really, is really stable. And it wasn't like, you know, I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm feeling so terrible, like something has to give. What is it? Even in that frame of mind, like coming out was just this big like relief for me. Kind of like felt like I was coming into myself, like my true self, which was really nice.
That's so beautiful. I guess, like, I was basically never closeted, but when you're keeping a secret, it sometimes becomes a habit and you don't even question, you're like, yep, that's fine, tick, like, that's staying in the vault.
Yeah.
And then you're like, actually, so much has changed since I made that decision. Obviously, it's a massive decision to make, and when you're younger, it is so much like easier because of like homophobia to be like, well, I'm not going to do that because it just doesn't feel like an option for some people. Like, ugh, it's terrible.
Yeah, and I guess that's like the power of stigma, isn't it? Like it just completely like silences people. Like even when they maybe like don't need to be silenced. Like my coming out was definitely like a big kind of anticlimax. Like it wasn't a big deal at all for anybody. And obviously again, like, you know, I've been really lucky in that respect. I know there are like so many different things that can influence like someone's experience of coming out. I mean, I definitely didn't grow up in a like LGBT friendly environment by any stretch of the imagination, but I guess there wasn't like any blatant or like severe homophobia like in my family, even if it wasn't like a pro gay family. So yeah, I was definitely like on the front foot, I think, compared to a lot of other people.
I do think like around that time it was very much like taboo. It was kind of like we didn't talk about that, and obviously like it wasn't mentioned in schools. Like I don't really feel like there was like gay representation in the media, like, and the fact that it's not talked about makes it seem like it's something that isn't normal. And obviously that's something like when you're a teenager or a kid, you don't want to be anything other than normal, and like the messaging you receive about what isn't okay, you kind of unquestionably, like, you don't question it, you're just like, okay, now I know the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when I started secondary school in 2003, I think that's the year that it stopped being illegal to quote unquote promote homosexuality in schools. So even though yeah, it was literally just on the cusp of it being a legal thing that could happen. So obviously none of the teachers spoke about it. Like it wasn't a thing that like was in our curriculum or anything. And you're right, like just by its absence as a teenager or as a, you know, 10, 11-year-old, whatever, like you take that in and you just internalize it as like, okay, this is something that we don't speak about. And even if no one's telling you like it's bad or it's evil, also no one's celebrating it and nobody's like promoting it or like creating space for you to talk about it, so you know it's just something that you keep a lid on. And I remember as well, like just stuff in the media from the time as well, like I remember when Will Young won Pop Idol.
Oh my God, Will Young.
And I remember it very vividly because my mum is like the like world's biggest Will Young fan.
She's like, a gay ally.
Yeah. And so I remember like him winning and everything, and then I remember like him being like, I don't know if this is right, but this is how I remember it at the time, like basically him getting like outed by the media. I don't know if he came out or if he was like pressured to come out or if he was just like straight up outed. And it was just this like big scandal. And like the fact that it was like news, and even though nobody was saying, like, I wasn't reading anything as a kid that said in like black and white, like, don't be gay. Just like even the fact that something like that was just like, oh, this like sordid, like dirty secret. You just take all that stuff on, don't you, and internalize it.
It's like just the gossip mill of the universe. Like when you're a teenager, you're just like, do I want anything about me to be spread around the school like wildfire? Like,
definitely.
Yeah. I'm only like a couple of years younger than you, so I'm 27 in a month. I've just got to keep trying to remember how old I am. But yeah, at school, it's weird because I think my parents basically accidentally created a very pro-bisexual environment because they always said to me, when you're married to a man or a woman. So I just always assumed that they like knew I was bisexual.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know why they said that. I think they just realized something was up with me. They were
Yeah,
like, you've got a little gay child.
They were just doing some good, like, inclusive parenting.
So they always said that. So I was always just like, okay, yeah, obviously. I never like thought about trying to like not be out as bi, and like even I remember because like I was like bullied for being gay, like a lesbian in like, secondary school, and I was always like, I'm not even a lesbian. Like I was like obsessed with so many of the guys at school. I was like, if you just look at the evidence here, you'll realize I'm not a lesbian. All my stories are going to meld into one. But basically, the reason I decided to like come out is so ridiculous. So
Well, I'm ready.
Yeah, so as you said, 2009, bad mental health time. I had cancer, so obviously that was
Oh my
severely
goodness.
terrible.
Yeah.
So that was like, okay, this year of your life is fucked, basically, and you just have to try not to die. So after that, I was like, wow, that was so terrible. I think I'm depressed because, like, a year later, I was like, well, now I'm not dying, but I do
Yeah.
feel very bad.
Yeah.
So I was like, I feel very depressed. And that's when I like started seeing like a private therapist. But also obviously then I had short hair because I had been on chemo,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
had no hair. And I was like, well, now everyone's gonna think I'm a lesbian because I have short hair, so I might as well be gay.
Yeah.
I don't know why that was my like reasoning, but I was like, I'm definitely rocking like a Sue Perkins kind of look. I was like wearing blazers and stuff. Like, oh my god, my fashion choices were so bad.
It's okay. It was 2009. Like,
It was a bad time. I mean, that would have
it's
been
fine.
like 2010, 2011. But I just was like, okay, yeah, I am. And by that point, obviously, no one can bully you when you have cancer. So the whole like, you're a lesbian thing had died down. So I
Yeah.
was like, you can't even take the piss out of me. So yeah, I'm bi. Kind of frustrating when everyone around you knows you're gay before you do, which is like kind of what happened like for me when I was like, I'm 10. Like, how, what,
Yeah.
like, everyone was like, "You're in love with your best friend. You're a lesbian." I'm like, I didn't even fancy her. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on here? So
Yeah. People used to shout. I think it's the short hair thing again. And maybe some other kind of just like gay energy that I was giving off. I had exactly the same. Like people when I was in sixth form, people used to shout, like kids used to shout at me down the corridor, like dyke. And I remember at the time being like, what? Why
it's honestly so
why are you
shocking. I
saying that?
really, I'm just like, I want to message those people on Facebook and be like, "Hey, you know when you like realized I was gay when we were all like 9? Like,
How did
wasn't
you
giving it
know?
away."
I know. Now I'm like, you like these kids like they knew like a good decade before I did.
It's actually kind of shocking. So yeah, I'm just like, I don't know. I never really had an official coming out. I always thought my parents knew, so I never even bothered mentioning it to them. But I think something that helped is my mum has like a gay best friend essentially, and he was of the generation of like dads who had to come out as gay, like who were married with wives and
Right,
kids,
yeah.
and then were
Yeah.
like, wait a second, I'm gay. So she had like seen how hard it was for him, and
Yeah.
like I think she obviously then had first-hand experience of like someone she knew and loved coming out as gay when it was like really hard.
Yeah.
So I think she's like a good gay ally, but she's like none the wiser on stuff like bi stuff or trans stuff. Like,
Mhm.
but I do think that my parents are pretty well meaning in that department. And I'm also convinced that my dad is bi because one time in Sainsbury's, I was like, "Dad, are you bi?" And he was like, "Everything's on a spectrum." And to me, I'm like, "That's a yeah." I think my dad is bi, and my sister is also bi. So I just think the whole family is quite
You're
gay.
all on the spectrum.
So yeah, bad mental health time in 2009. I
Yeah.
think I had always been depressed as a child, and I think it's
Yeah.
really weird when you realize that you've been depressed like your whole
Yeah.
life because you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, is that not how everyone feels?"
Yeah, totally.
Uni horrendous. So I moved to London when I was 18 to do an art foundation,
Mhm.
and I really struggled. Like it kind of hit me like a train. Like moving to
Yeah.
London when you're a teenager is like
Yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah, it's a big deal.
so I was very depressed at that time, partly that I blame on like being on the pill, which I
Mhm.
think can mess you up a lot more than you realize at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I relate to that as well.
Yeah, when I was in uni, smoking weed all the time, having panic attacks every time I smoked weed, which is like a sign to not smoke weed for anyone out there. And like, yeah, just drinking too much, being like incredibly anxious, incredibly paranoid, incredibly depressed. Like, I was getting extensions for all my essays and like going to the GP and being like, I'm really depressed, I need an extension. And they were just like, cool, yeah, you're depressed, you're getting an extension. But like, was never offered any help beyond like, oh, do you want to go on antidepressants?
Yeah.
Which I like tried and then spectacularly failed at by like going off them cold turkey, which is also bad.
Yeah. That's hard. That is hardcore.
I did my year abroad, and Copenhagen, it's so expensive there that I couldn't afford to drink, basically. I think sometimes when you have a changed environment, you're like,
Yeah.
I can't live like this, actually.
Yeah,
like,
definitely. And probably like a big coping mechanism just like disappearing overnight. Like, yeah.
Doing drugs and getting drunk all the time, like that isn't necessarily a sign that someone is like having a very bad time. And I think it's actually very easy to like slip under the radar when you're at uni and everyone thinks you're doing okay. So when I got back from Copenhagen, I was like, I need to find some gay friends and I need to get a therapist. So yeah, then I found a great queer therapist through Mesmac. And now I would say I'm just kind of like regular fucked up. I'm like, okay, yes, I have my like depression and my anxiety, but like I know when it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, you can like recognize those signs in yourself. Can I ask you a question about all of that?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just wonder, like, because I think, like, for me, I know there was a lot going on that contributed to my mental health, and it certainly wasn't just my my sexuality, but I definitely think like those feelings as a child did contribute. I wonder, like, if you think there's any connection between your like mental well-being and being bi. And then also something you said about like when you came back from Copenhagen, you were like, I need to get gay friends and find a therapist. Like, was there something about like being like in the gay community that was good for your mental health?
Yeah. So without getting too deep into things, I think I have slowly realized like over the last like year or so, like I don't think I am attracted to men. Like I still identify as bi, but when I was in my early 20s, I definitely was like being very reckless, and that did include like having sex with people that I didn't really actually want to have sex with, or like kind of using that as like almost like an unhealthy coping mechanism, but also like kind of like self-harm. Like not really caring if I was like particularly safe in a situation, or like being in relationships with people that I didn't actually like, but feeling like a very desperate need to be like wanted by a person. A lot of that was just like having unhealthy attachments to people, kind of again like with low self-esteem, being like, oh, if I go out tonight and I go home with a guy, that's some kind of achievement for me. Which is like so strange.
I'm like smiling because this all sounds very familiar.
And then having kind of like a string of like abusive relationships with men, I don't know, it all just felt part of like the parcel of the chaos that was going on in my life. Like I was often just not in good situations. It's weird. I think because it's so much that was happening, it didn't really feel like, oh, here's the line and we've crossed it. It just felt like we're in complete madness here. So I think when I was in Copenhagen, I didn't date really. I didn't sleep with anyone. So I think, and like I was on dating apps trying to get dates with girls, but in Copenhagen, everyone is blonde, and I don't really fancy blonde people. Hey, it's me from the future, just coming to correct my past self because suddenly so many butch blonde people I have fancied came to mind, and I don't want to offend any blonde hotties out there. It was a very dry year. So I think after that, I was kind of like, I've been in Leeds for like 2 years. This is my last year of uni. Where are my gay friends at? Like, where are the gay places to go? And like, I'd been to Viaduct like once and I hated it there. And then it all just kind of fell in my lap. I think it was like a when you're looking for something and then it all actually happens moment. Because I started going to Quilting Points, which is like a reading group that's at the uni that's organized by like PhD students in the School of English, which was like extremely nerdy of me to do, but also everyone there is gay. So that was kind of like I didn't realize this was a gay thing, but it definitely is. And that kind of connected me to like Wharf and like meeting loads of queer people, and like also like basically everyone I was friends with up to then anyway was bisexual, because I feel like people just flock together. So like a lot of my friends were bi and queer, but I felt like there was like a secret queer community in Leeds that I hadn't found.
Yeah.
So that definitely helped me because it was like I don't feel like I'm on the outside trying to find that thing anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like trying to go on dates with girls on Tinder is not the same as like being in a queer community or feeling like you have queerness in your life.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know, you know, when you're watching the L Word, you're like, well, where's the lesbian cafe? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and then when I found like my queer therapist, then it was kind of obvious to me that I didn't want to ever have a therapist again that like wouldn't be able to be very understanding of like my sexual orientation, because
Yeah.
like I wanted to talk about like dating people, and I
Yeah.
didn't want it to be like, oh, here, let me explain to you what being bi is. You know?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Totally.
So that definitely did help.
Yeah.
But yeah, like all the like horrible statistics about all the things that bisexual people are like more likely to experience, I feel like that was like the whole of my early 20s. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh dear. I think sometimes you just don't, because I had like lived with mental illness for so long, I think it's very hard to recognize when you're in a moment of crisis because you
Yeah.
are just like trying to get to the next day. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
a lot of the times when I have actually got help, it's been when I'm feeling in a better place to actually do that, because I think it also
Yeah.
can feel very
Yeah.
daunting. A lot of the time I was putting it off because I didn't want to open like that can of worms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, like, well, in my experience anyway, like if your mental health deteriorates relatively slowly over a period of time, which for a lot of people is the way that it happens, you know, you don't just suddenly like wake up one day and you're in crisis. Like that does happen to some people, but a lot of the time it's, you know, it's a slow or slowish deterioration. Like you like recalibrate, I think, to like what's normal, and then suddenly like you're at a place which is like where you're so not okay, but you've kind of got there so gradually that you can't like recognize the position that you're in. I think that's definitely where I got to. I kind of look back on it now and I
Oh
think like,
yeah.
oh my goodness, like I was so unwell, but at the time I was just like, well, this is just the way I am, right? Like
Yeah.
this is just the way I've always been. This is normal.
Yeah, a lot of it was because I was at uni and like I'm such a perfectionist, I'm such an overachiever. Like I was kind of like, well, as long as I'm getting good grades, I'm fine.
Everything's fine.
Which
Yeah.
is like, so that is not a good way to live. Like my mental health has generally improved so much since I left uni because like I did history of art, so obviously there was not pressure on me, it was only for myself. But
Well,
like
that's the worst pressure.
having like coursework and essays, I would literally spend like a month writing an essay.
Yeah.
And I would like do insane amounts of research and like edit things like 3 times, but I would do it in the most stressful way and like submit it like 1 minute before the deadline.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I had to keep all that going. So like the second I left uni and I was like, okay, I don't have to live in like perpetual chaos now to get
Yeah.
like validation of my academic success. And like
Yeah.
having a normal grown up job, it's just like, oh yeah, I go there and then I go home.
Yeah.
Like there is a much better kind of like boundary between your work life and your home life. Whereas when
Yeah.
you're at uni, it's just like all a big scramble.
Yeah. It's all consuming. It can be all consuming.
But yeah, so I think it became a lot easier for me once I left uni. And also I kind of by that point have realized like I need to like not drink because it makes things so much worse for me.
Yeah.
So I had like gone to like a 3 drink rule, which was kind of like, let's keep things under control.
Yeah.
I basically like never drink anymore, but obviously it's made so much easier by lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was definitely a massive thing because like if you're feeling very out of control and then you're getting blackout drunk, that just kind of like times everything by like 1,000. Because it's like
Absolutely.
obviously you can drink and it can be like not an unhealthy thing, but I think if you have any kind of mental health problem, drinking can become a way to deal with it or
Yeah.
something very like destructive.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a wild card, like especially like my experience with being on different types of medication as well for my mental health. Like took me a while to realize that I couldn't predict like how drinking was going to interact with all of that. So I'm like you now. I drink very infrequently, and it's just purely for my mental health because I don't know if I'm going to be like have the best time ever, or I'm just gonna be like crying in a corner about something that happened like 5 years ago that I don't care about anymore.
Oh yeah, it can be very unpredictable. Like for me, it's just like I'm kind of a lightweight, so I can like black out very easily, and obviously like that's a very scary thing to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, apologies to anyone who's had to deal with me like falling to the floor, because that definitely is tough. And sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I'm like a different person then. I think now, if I saw myself in like my first or second year of uni, I would be like, this girl needs like serious help.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel you. The other way around as well. Like, if I wish I could like go back in time to my like 18 or like 19-year-old self and be like, hey, look, this life in the future, like this is what you're gonna have. Like this is possible. Like you can enjoy your life and like feel a sense of contentment. And yeah, I just feel like a completely different person than I was then. Thanks to a great combination of medication, therapy, and a lot of like hard work on my part, I guess, in like engaging with therapy and then engaging with things that like I know are going to be good for my mental health, and just like learning to sit through a lot of feelings, I think is probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I've taken on my mental health as like a project. Like I have my little things that I do. I do my yoga. I have a shower every day. I go on a walk, and like just doing those things and feeling like I'm in a place where things are taking over. That really helps for me to realize when I am in a worse place, and I'm like, okay, let's go to those healthy coping mechanisms. Like it means it doesn't like send me in a complete spiral. And I think like especially if you have depression, like when you are in like a dip, it is so scary because you feel like that low period will never end. And like even if you're just having like a particularly hard couple of weeks, it can feel like this is never ending. And like you're worried, like, is this going to be like the bad time, especially if you have had like a very significant kind of like mental health crisis.
Like there's no end, and also like there has been no beginning. Like you've just been like that. This is just like the state you've existed in forever. What you said about like the things that you do to like maintain your mental health, I think that's so important to like, obviously, like I'm not saying like go for a walk and you'll be fine, but like if when you're in a better place you can get some really like solid stuff into your routine, like having a shower every day. Or one of the things I used to do was like make my bed like as soon as I woke up, and it's such a small thing, and like obviously that did not cure my depression, but it's something that I've like continued now. And it's just like those little things that are there like as the absolute foundation of your well-being, so that like you say, like if something comes along to rock that, then you're just, yeah, things stay a little bit more steady. I used to make like a little tick list on my phone of like things like the morning routine, and even just being able to like tick off like got out of bed, like tick, like just those tiny things that you can put in place to be like, okay, we're
Yeah, that
going.
reminds me, there's this like app I've been seeing that is like a list where you put like all of your morning routine, which is like good for if you have depression or if you have ADHD or any kind of like executive dysfunction kind of thing. And it just like has alarms and reminds you to do all those certain things and like tick them off. I think when you talk to someone who like does not have any mental health problems, they literally have like no understanding and no context of like how difficult just being alive can be, like when you're struggling. And it's like actually sometimes doing those things is very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm glad we both agreed that 2009 was bad.
For so many reasons.
Do you want to talk a bit about like mental health in general for LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, so it resonates loads with like a lot of what we've been just talking about, like with our personal experience. But there's just like consistent evidence that obviously being LGBTQI plus does not make you mentally ill, but it puts you at a much higher risk than the kind of straight cis population of experiencing like certain types of mental health difficulties. So like low self-esteem, which we've both talked about, depression, anxiety, social anxiety, eating problems, eating disorders, addiction, self-harm, and suicidal feelings. And it's, I think we've like touched on a lot of it, but I think it's a combination of homophobia, transphobia, biphobia that's in society at large. And kind of like that, the feeling of stigma and discrimination, whether that's like on quite a low level, like I experienced, of just kind of like taking in like the general like attitude of society, all the way through to hate crime and violence. And then obviously like people might have had difficult or traumatic experiences coming out. And then just a kind of like general experience of like social isolation or rejection or exclusion, like whether that is actual rejection and exclusion, like from your peers at school or from your family or from your friends as an adult or in the workplace, or whether that's just like an internalized sense of like not being quote unquote normal or not being okay or right. And then obviously like, people in different parts of the world, like where homosexuality or whatever under the LGBT banner is still illegal, like that brings its whole other like raft of trauma. So yeah, it is a pretty grim picture. I think there's just a lot of stuff going on still, like systemically, in a big way that damages people's mental health. And then obviously when you think about like other intersecting identities, if you think about like people of color, people from ethnically diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities, there's kind of the like additional stigma on top of the stigma of being LGBT, plus like specific, experiences that come from like the intersection of one or more of those different types of identity. So yeah, I know you like mentioned some of the stats for bi people. Like the stats are pretty bad for like all LGBT people. Really, I won't go into any of like the specific stats, but there are and there are other factors too. Like so, James, who's one of our project team members, he recently wrote his dissertation for his undergraduate degree about like trans people's experiences of the healthcare system in general. So it wasn't just mental health. And one of the points he made in that, he did kind of some research with focus groups. One of the points he made in that was like the difficulty of like, because there are such long waiting lists for gender identity clinics to get like hormone treatment or gender affirming surgery, a lot of trans or non-binary people will kind of have to like fund the cost of that themselves. So then there's like a really high level of debt within the community, which obviously like contributes to people's mental health problems massively. So they're just all these things that kind of like build up on top of each other that I think just contribute to this kind of general like different like there's just general like culture of exclusion or oppression or prejudice that obviously like can massively contribute to people's poor mental health. And then once people do recognize, and again like it can be difficult for people to recognize, like what you were talking about with uni and drinking and drug taking, like obviously like clubbing, drinking, drug taking, like obviously it's been a little bit different over the last couple of years with the pandemic, but that's like a big part of like kind of gay culture. So sort of addiction or substance use problems can kind of like fly under the radar there a little bit as well. And also I think if you've just grown up like used to being made to feel that you're different or you don't fit in, like the impact that can have on your self-esteem from such a young age, you might not necessarily even like realize that that's not normal. I think that was definitely the case with me. Like I just thought like everyone was like this. And then when you do get to services, there's kind of all sorts of like barriers that we know about that make mental health services kind of less effective for LGBT people. I mean, you talked about having a queer therapist and how that was really positive for you. Obviously, like, there are loads of LGBT people who'll have like a straight therapist or a cis therapist. And like, obviously some of them are great and are like really like well informed and have like taken the time to educate themselves. But other people like you might be sitting in a therapy session having to explain like, this is what it means to be trans, or this is what it means to be non-binary, or, not knowing like, oh, is this person like secretly homophobic, or like is this person secretly transphobic? Like, do I really want to share everything about myself with them? There's kind of specific services like MESMAC that you've mentioned, that you can go to for like LGBT like affirmative therapy, but it's not kind of like the norm in mainstream NHS services. And then there are like really like tangible things as well. So like we're doing a little bit of work in the Leeds LGBT Plus Minds project at the minute to change the way that we collect data about sexual orientation and gender identity, because we just don't, and it's not just Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service, it's all the IAPT services across the country, they all have to submit, it's kind of dry, but they all have to submit the same data to like national IAP, so like to the government basically, like demographic data and data that shows like people's like levels of recovery and basically like is the service working. So obviously when people are like referred to the service or they refer themselves to the service, like we ask for like demographic information, but when it comes to giving your gender identity or your sexual orientation, like the options are really, really limited. So there's big barriers like that, like literally at the front door. Like if you go onto the website, you fill out the self-referral form and like your gender identity isn't there. There's no way for you to tell us that you're trans or non-binary, or there's no way for you to tell us that you're pansexual, for example. Like, yeah, obviously it's just it's a big block, like right at the very first step.
And
So,
it's like that actually affects everything. So you don't have any data on trans people. So that is really challenging. And especially, I just think, God, like if you're trans or non-binary and you have to select the other for gender, it's like that is not getting off to a good start, because no one wants to be like, oh yeah, I'm the weird one.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. It just says like, yeah, this is like the opposite of welcoming, isn't it? Like it just gives, I don't know, I feel like it gives a really strong message to people that like this service isn't for you.
Yeah, and it's like that is from like legal things and a lot of things to do with data. It's like, well, non-binary isn't a legal gender, but it's like you can still collect data, and it's something that is annoying when it's kind of like the responsibility is passed off to like, oh well, that's just the data that we collect, and it's
exactly.
Like, seen as a very like logical way to do things because it's to do with data, and it's like that doesn't mean that it's not like oppressive or exclusionary because it's data. Like data is made by people.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's this like, it's really easy for people to fall into the attitude of thinking that like data or anything to do with like information technology is like completely neutral, and actually it's better than neutral. It's like it's the best way to do things, and it's just not the case at all. But we're making good progress actually, like in Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service. We've like found a way that we can collect gender identity and sexual orientation data like in a different way than National IAPT requires us to. So even if that information doesn't go back to National IAPT, like we are still like hopefully this side of this year, but if not, it'll be early 2022. We're going to be in a position where we can collect that data anyway, and we just use it locally. Even if we can't report it back nationally, at least we will know as a service like how many trans and non-binary people are using our service, and actually be able to start understanding like in a quantitative way like how the service is working for people. So that's good. And we've worked with the LGBT Foundation in Manchester to do that, because that is like a completely different model of running IAPT over in Manchester. It's kind of commissioned out to loads of small charities. So the LGBT Foundation in Manchester will like run the like LGBT IAPT basically. So obviously they're super hot on all their data collection. So they've been able to help us like figure out how to change it here in Leeds. So hopefully that change is coming soon.
Yeah, and that's good. It's good when there's like a model that people can then work off, because it's not just, oh, this is the way we do things.
Exactly.
If other people manage to do it in a different way, then you can't really use that excuse.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I'm really like, I don't know, I feel very strongly like if you get the answer like, oh, we can't do it, like often if you ask like, okay, why can't you do it, it's always just like, well, because we can't do it. I'm a big advocate for just like carrying on pushing and just carrying on making the point until you find a way around it, because quite often you can, like it's just kind of people sticking to what they know a lot of the time.
Okay, so I'm going to read out some things that I got sent in on Instagram when I was asking people about this episode and what they wanted to know about mental health services or therapy and things like that. So the first one says, I want to know how to find bi-friendly services. LGBT friendly, in quote marks, is not the same thing. So I wonder about calling up all the LGBT friendly ones to ask, but that feels like outing myself to strangers, which I'm nervous about, unless they're in a bi group or space. Also, intersectionality. If I want to talk about my bisexuality plus how ADHD messes with my day to day, do I have to compartmentalize those and only talk about each one to an accepting person if I can't easily and cheaply find someone who gets both? Or do I have to train someone in one of them? And can I get paid for that, please? And I feel like that really, like, that is hard. And there is just like this stereotype, which is kind of true, that therapists are just like old white men or women, and a
Yeah.
lot of the time they are. And like,
Yeah.
if you're trying to explain to them something and you end up having to teach them, like I've seen this a lot online, people being like, when I have to like assign my therapist a suggested reading to like explain what my identity means,
Yeah.
like if you're in that place where you feel like you're the expert but you're going to an expert for help,
Yeah.
that can just be like really off-putting,
Yeah.
because it's like, why am I trusting with you with something like as precious as my mental health and like all my inner thoughts
Yeah.
if you actually
100%.
don't understand me? And I
Yeah.
think it's true, like when I'm looking for like private therapists, a lot of them say like LGBT friendly, and
Yeah.
it's like there's a difference between being queer yourself, being an ally, and then being someone who's just like, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm not a therapist myself, so I'm kind of talking from like personal experience slash like working in the mental health like sector for the last few years. As with a lot of NHS services, like it's a real like lottery at times as to who you get. I would say like if you are referred to IAPT or if you're under the community mental health team or any other kind of like NHS service, you can ask. It's always like worth asking if you can see like specifically like a queer therapist or um a therapist of a certain gender. You won't always be able to get what you've asked for, but it's definitely worth asking, and like it's well within your rights to ask that as well. I think if you're looking for a queer therapist or a therapist that understands a certain perspective or experience, for example, like if you want to see a black therapist or you want to see someone who understands ADHD, like the person who's written in has said, it's always again like worth having a little Google of what's around like in your local area. It can be a little bit difficult to like sift through all of that stuff, but you can always go to like a kind of trusted charity like Mind, who should be able to give you advice as to like whether there are any, like I'll use the LGBT example, like whether there are any LGBT specific like charities or organizations or peer support groups or anything like that. When it comes to Leeds, like we talked about this before, but like I can put together like a little directory of like LGBT stuff in Leeds, like LGBT led services in Leeds that might be helpful for some listeners. And then when it comes to private therapists, I recommend looking at the BACP, which is the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. If you look at their directory, then you find like BACP accredited therapists, and you can search by, I don't even know what the right way to describe it is, but like by specialism. And obviously, like that's a really good point about like whether it's a queer person or an ally or someone who's just like, yeah, it's fine. Usually you can get a sense of that like from people's bios. But then I was reading recently, I read The Invisible Orientation, which is about asexuality. It's a good book. I recommend it. I am not like, I don't identify as asexual myself, so I'm not like recommending it from like a I know for sure this is great perspective, but I found it really helpful. And something that the author wrote like really stuck with me about like, and I know again this is like work that we shouldn't have to be doing, but you can like interview your therapist. Like if you are paying for private therapy, don't think that like you have to stick with the first person that you come across, and ask them if you can have a free 20-minute half-hour chat that you don't pay for, or that you pay like a very reduced rate for, in order to get a sense of whether that person's right for you. And you can ask them, you can follow up on stuff that they've written like on their website and try and get a better understanding of like whether they really do understand where you're coming from, or whether they've just kind of put LGBT friendly in as some kind of buzzword. So I guess like part of it is just like knowing that it is well within your rights to do those things, like whether it's an NHS or private or third sector service, like you can ask those questions. You don't have to kind of assume that, once you're in that therapist slash person receiving therapy relationship, that you have to defer to whatever the therapist says or does. Like you can ask questions of them as well.
Yeah, I think it can be like really hard to advocate for yourself in that kind of
It
situation,
is.
like with a therapist, especially if it's your first time going to therapy. I think it's really important to say like the first person you see doesn't have to be the person that you spend a long time working with. Like it does take time to find the person who works well with you. I do recommend, if you're looking for a private therapist, writing like a blanket introduction email that you can send to different people that very briefly like explains what you'd like to cover, what you want to work on, like whether you have any like diagnoses of mental health conditions if you want to include that. And then you can ask them questions like, I want to speak about this, what's your experience in that area? Like, you don't have to out yourself, but if you do feel comfortable saying like, I'm queer or I'm bisexual, like, please can you tell me your experience working with queer patients, and things like that.
Yeah.
I think having just like something short, kind of like a template that you can send to multiple different people, takes out some of the like emotional work involved in that. And you could also set up like a burner email account and not use your name like the first time you contact someone.
Absolutely.
Obviously, therapists, like, they are trained and like they know to keep things confidential, but nevertheless, it can be daunting kind of telling a stranger that you're bisexual, especially if you're kind of wary about the reception of that. And yeah, it's good to like talk to people and have like a short session just to gauge if you like them, because I've definitely like, I've only had it once, but like I have been to a therapist and just been like, I just don't click with you. Like, it's not anything specifically about you. You didn't like say anything off-putting, but like the right vibe. So I think definitely give yourself like a few sessions to actually see if you like someone, because like you have to trust them. And if you don't have that relationship of trust, you can like, they're not going to be offended if you stop seeing them.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, don't be worried about like hurting a therapist's feelings. Like, they're used to this kind of thing. Like, they're used to it not working. Like, it's not a personal like slight on them. You meet people all the time that you just like don't click with for whatever reason. Like, it's no different with therapists or counselors either. And on the point about intersectionality as well, like obviously that just adds like another layer of complexity. And probably a lot of times like you won't find somebody that shares like all the same lived experience as you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't find somebody who like gets it. And
it's like, you might find a therapist who's really great in one area, and it might feel really disappointing that you don't feel confident to share literally everything with them, but you can actually be like, cool, this is the one thing I want to focus on at the moment.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is more of a short-term project kind of thing.
You don't have to
trying to find like the perfect fit if you can't find that.
You don't have to kind of always do everything all at once together at the same time. You can find different people to help you with different things at different points in your life. The biggest like underlying issue, I guess, with all of it is like, if you're out there listening to this and you think you're interested in getting into a career in mental health, like, the world just needs more queer therapists. The world needs more queer therapists, more people of colour to become therapists, more disabled people to become therapists. So if you're listening and thinking like, oh yeah, maybe that's something I might be interested in, then like, do your research, see if it might be the way in for you. I know like in Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service, for example, we are just beginning, well, not beginning, that's not true, like picking back up quite a lot of pieces of work about how we can improve the like ethnic diversity of our workforce, because like at the end of the day, for a lot of people there's just a lack of therapists. Like, it's the same with queer therapists as well. There's like a lack of therapists who like look like you or who have similar experiences to you. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done kind of like across the system as well, I think, to just recruit more people into the field, because like you say, it is very like stereotypically, and there is truth in it, it's a kind of like white middle class job to get into. So that is part of the issue as well, that hopefully will change over time, but it needs the kind of NHS to step up and do something about the diversity of its workforce.
It's like one of those problems that has a million problems
Yeah,
attached.
it is.
Okay, so the second person who's written in is talking specifically about IAP services. So they've said, I'd appreciate a mention about how mental health services can clash with gender identity clinic services.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people, including myself, have had issues accessing community mental health teams and IAPT because they'll be like, well, I can see you're with the gender clinic, can't they help you? Especially when your mental health issues are linked to lack of healthcare due to dysphoria. I've always been like, I'm lucky if I see them twice a year for 15 minutes. So yeah, I think like there are a lot of issues around people kind of thinking, putting trans people in a box essentially, where they're like, oh, you have mental health problems and you're trans. That sounds like a trans problem. Can you go see like a trans specific service? And basically, there's not very many of those. And when you do get referred, you're waiting for years.
yeah,
Or they're like, oh, we can see you're trans. We don't think you have mental health problems. We think maybe you just like need to go transition, and like they're not offering you any help really. They're kind of like, we're not sure what to do with you, which obviously is like extremely disheartening, and like it is to do with like trans people not being like very well understood by mental health professionals.
yeah,
So I think that can be very difficult. And also like gender clinics don't offer mental health help. Like
yeah,
that's not really like a replacement for accessing mental health services, even if accessing gender affirmative healthcare would have a positive benefit on your mental health. Having that in place doesn't erase the fact that you need access to mental health services.
absolutely.
They don't always overlap. And obviously, like, you're not getting CBT, you're not getting therapy, you're not getting all
Yeah,
of these resources at the gender identity clinic. Like, that's just not what they're there for.
yeah. This is like an issue that I've heard like from a lot of people who are involved in our LGBT plus minds project. Actually, the dissertation that I mentioned earlier that James wrote goes into this as well. And this like whole kind of prejudiced misconception that you can't be like trans and mentally unwell as like two separate things. And I think it's like a massive gap in the system in Leeds, or I don't even know if gap's the right word. I guess it is a gap and a contradiction and yeah, like a part of the system that's just broken. So within the Leeds LGBT plus minds project, basically like the aim of the project is to improve Leeds mental wellbeing service like for the LGBT community. And yeah, like you mentioned earlier, Kit, like our project team, like we all identify as LGBTQIA plus. We all either work for mental health services or have used mental health services, and usually it's both.
Mm-hmm.
And we're basically just trying to collect as much information as we can at the minute about stuff that's not working. So obviously this is just like one kind of like anecdotal example from the podcast, but I will like take it away to the team. But we're running a like community wellbeing festival towards the end of November. So it's like 29th of November to the 4th of December, where we're asking people, like anyone from the LGBT community in Leeds who's either like needed or used mental health services. So you don't have to have access mental health services to participate, and you don't have to have used Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service or Leeds IAP. And we're running like a series of workshops and like discussion sessions basically to get people's like honest feedback about like what is working and what is not working. And then we'll go away as a project team and invite everyone that's been part of the Community Wellbeing Festival as well to join us to like make sense of all the feedback and like data and information that we gather and just try and see where change needs to happen. So like the stuff with the data and gender identity and sexual orientation options, like that's something that we've already been working on, and we're hoping that there's loads of other stuff that's going to come from the Community Wellbeing Festival. But that interface between gender identity services and mental health services, I think, is definitely something that we can like look at and try and understand like why is it the way that it is. And like I said earlier, like not just take no for an answer. If people say like it's just the way it is because that's the way it is, like see if we can use our sort of collective voice and the influence of Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service as a service as well to do something about that. So if anyone, the person who's written in, wherever you are, or anyone else is interested in like coming and sharing more feedback like that, and getting involved with like what we actually do with that feedback, that our community wellbeing festival will be happening.
Exactly. And I feel like it's like very easy to have like distrust with like mental health services or kind of health services in general. And I really understand if people would be hesitant to like share negative experiences they've had, but this project is literally to try to make things better. There is an acknowledgement that like things need to change, and there are ways that things are like going wrong or people are being let down. And it's also really good to know that like you will be speaking to a queer person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've put a lot of work in to try and make it as like safe and accessible an event as possible. Kit, I'll send you like all the details so that you can link people to it, but all the information is there about like what we're doing like on the day for the in-person event and across the like online sessions as well, to make sure that like people feel that they can share their negative and positive experiences, if there are any positive ones, of using IAPT or Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service or any other mental health services, or just your general like experience with your mental well-being as a member of the LGBT community. And there's loads of like fun, exciting stuff as well. So we've tried to make it like not too like research and feedback heavy. So it's like half research and feedback type stuff, and then half well-being and creative sessions that are going to be hosted by local LGBT people from Leeds. So it should be very fun and exciting.
And there's goodie bags.
And there's goodie bags for the first 15 people who book tickets, which by the time this podcast goes out, they probably will have gone. I have to say that. But we're also like everyone who attends will get like a £5 either voucher for the Bookish Type Queer Bookshop, or we will donate it on your behalf to Sarbat Yorkshire, which is a LGBT friendly group for Sikhs in Yorkshire. So there's that benefit. If you come to the in-person bit, there's a free lunch, so there's always that as well.
Oh my god, free lunch is definitely the way to get people to go to something.
I think so. And it's free to attend. It's all free to attend. It's not a paid event or anything like that.
Okay, it's time for your tarot. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm just going to do a one card reading.
Okay.
I'm going to try and get connected to the cards. There's the Four of Swords.
Okay.
I'm concerned because the swords are usually not a fun time, but the swords are also about mental health quite a lot of the time. So,
and 4 is my lucky number. So
okay, I'll see what it says. I have this tiny book that just has like 3 words for each card. So I'll see what it says in the book, and then I'll see what Cassandra said. Four of Swords. Okay, it's a good one. Rest, recovery, and rigidness. I feel like this is very Taurus, because Tauruses are known for being really stubborn.
And also loving rest.
The Four calls us to take care of ourselves, putting our bodies at rest and clearing our minds. As a queer person, this mini suit, so she's talking about 2, 3, and 4 of Swords, within the swords, often tells a very frank coming out story. If we look at coming out as something that is not straight and cisgender, we start with feeling trapped in the decision of whether to do so or not. Eventually, though, most of us have to come to make the decision to come out. There are many cards you can throw down to see the coming out process, but the Three of Swords is one of the only cards that reminds us that sometimes we really do lose family and friends as part of that process. The response to that is the Four, the time to rest and prioritize caring for yourself, since we are sometimes seemingly on our own in the next phase. The Four shows up to remind us that our bodies and our minds are incredibly important, and even more when we're concerned with our heart. Take some introvert time, some hot showers, and whatever you need to feel rested up. The swords can also indicate concerns with mental health, and the community deals disproportionately with mental illness. The Four of Swords largely encourages you to get back to resting and make time for yourself, although it can also indicate the exhaustion and burnout that living with mental illness can bring. The advice still doesn't change though. Rest. Clear your mind and trust yourself. I mean, you just need some sleepy Taurus time.
You do not need to tell me twice. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that was very like resonant with a lot of what we've spoken about today, which is cool. I mean, I do really need to rest. I am.
Are you exhausted?
Yeah, I am exhausted.
Even though we got the extra hour?
I feel good for having got the extra hour, but yeah, I was working this morning, like we've got loads of stuff to get ready for the aforementioned community wellbeing festival, so definitely feeling the need to rest.
I think that was a good one.
Yeah,
that fits well for Taurus.
It fits very well with the Taurus.
Okay, we're ready for your agenda.
Okay, Cool. First thing on my agenda is improving mental health services for the LGBTQIA plus community and doing that with the LGBTQIA plus community. And a big part of that means, like improving our services and how they work from kind of like a technical or like operational side. But a lot of it also means trying to tackle the prejudice and the systemic issues that the LGBTQIA plus community still unfortunately face that like contribute to poor mental health and mental health difficulties. And on that note, the second thing on my agenda is just to draw everyone's attention to an open letter that's been written in response to some recent transphobic broadcasting or publishing by the BBC. So we will link you to the letter, and you can share it. They've had 12,000 verified signatures so far, which is great to see. It's really nice to read down the list of signatures as well and see the types of people that have signed. And there's lots of information like in the open letter that kind of explains like why the recent reporting has been problematic and like transphobic. And it also shows you like how you can make a complaint to the BBC should you wish to do that.
Yes, it's good to have a task action on the agenda. You're being very practical, very on brand. What's your third one?
Oh, I didn't realise there was a third one.
Oh my god, if you don't have one, that is totally fine because I have one on my mind that is completely ridiculous. I have decided that I've changed my opinion on Ariana Grande's latest album. So I originally thought it was really boring and not good, but I've decided that I think the deluxe edition of Positions is actually a good album. And if you just listen to like the second half, it's good. So yeah, I'd like to like apologize to Ariana Grande.
Ariana, I hope you're listening.
Exactly. Well, she better. But yeah, you have a very worthy agenda.
Thank you.